Alright, welcome back, and we're closing out the conference, The Power of Zu, and this is lecture 9, recording it for the International School of Systemology and for Mardukite Zuism. So we're wrapping up. It's been three days, 9 on our final 9th keynote lecture, and I want to kind of keep working on where we left off. And close this introductory series of lectures with summarize concise treatment of the human condition in relationship to the present state of affairs taking place on planet Earth. So, for title purposes, we could call this Biochemical Fragmentation Part 2, or Imprinting and Fragmentation Part 2. It's actually very important that a seeker fully understands the nature of imprinted fragmentation. Whenever those words are used in Mardukite and NexGen Systemology material, this is really important. It's especially important before considering just how strongly these imprints are affected by additional encounters and additional encoding and other facets of biochemical fragmentation, which this includes drugs, toxins, electronic inference, radiation. We're not just talking about the manner in which people are imprinted through events and memory and so forth. We've been treating in this series of lectures a lot of the biochemical organism that we treat as the genetic vehicle. And this is definitely, in addition to we've covered the foods and the water and the air we breathe and its processing and so forth. And of course, then got to take into consideration the drugs, chemicals, toxins, and other interferences, and of course, radiation. And so we want to get right down to it. I have a lot of information to cover, and I have a lot of data to summarize for you in this final lecture before our party this evening. Thank you for having been listening and paying forth attention towards this information over the last 3 days. I know these conferences can get kind of long, very enjoyable. We've been able to introduce processing now to our conferences, which is makes it a little bit more interactive now, and perhaps of a little bit greater benefit for those attending. Also, for those that are here, we have the transcripts will be prepared, and you just let you know when those are ready. It'll be produced in book form as The Power of Zu. I expect it to be available to the public around mid-January, so just give us a couple weeks on that. So now every individual here, every individual listening that's occupying some attachment with the human condition has some kind or another assorted imprinting that's based on some type or another of an emotionally encoded experience. And this experience is going to have a reactive response component to it, such as like the more primitive fight or flight reflex action. But actually, there's many behavior response types that may be encoded. And the more strongly the emotional stimulation, the stronger the imprinting. Now, for those that are familiar with Tablets of Destiny materials and so forth, that's okay if you're not. But it's important for me to clarify here that not all imprinting is unconscious to us. but it does all contain highly charged emotional content. And the more positive, pleasurable moments in life, they don't seem to provide the same intense fragmentation, even when they represent relevant data. Okay, it's interesting that way. That even in forms of fragmentation and erroneous knowledge and so on, the peak moments of life and so on are not the sources of later fragmentation. It's really, it's mostly our perceived failures and the shortcomings and pains of existence that provide us with the conditioned experience and encoding that result in the type of imprinting that we speak of in NexGen Systemology. So, for example, an individual might have a negative experience with some kind of thing, form, or element in their youth, and then therefore they're going to form a conditioned response to this type of environmental stimulus in the future. Okay, so I mean, really, this in and of itself, this is not any kind of new news regarding the human condition, right? However, what we've discovered regarding specifically emotionally encoded imprints is more than basic stimulus response. He says the psychologist might understand it. These holographic imprints are given their personal significance as a result of personal emotion or the personal emotional investment one has with the aspects and forms and elements, what we call the facets of an imprint. You'll see that when you start reading about our form of processing and different methods of our spiritual technology, the facets of an imprint. And these can far exceed anything that is even deemed logical or at an analytical level concerning an event or event incident and the corresponding reactions that we have thereafter. So, whenever an imprint is made, the total quality of the experience is etched onto, as we've described it in some of our other literature, it's like a metaphoric slate or frame of film. And then we carry this with us, and we hold it up before our view at any time. It's either on command or by re-stimulation. Now, the contents of any imprint or memory, these may or may not even be valid, but the stronger the emotion, the greater the impression made of the content. And this impression encodes like these little bits of data concerning all the facets that are a part of the experience, almost like a snapshot, if you will. And this can include such information as time of day, the weather, the lighting in the environment, or the moisture in the air, and so forth. And this isn't even not to mention personal sensations, smells, taste, skin pressure, any observed physical actions or activities of others, activities of self, anything that contains some facet of the momentary imprinted information. This all becomes a part of that picture. Now, any facet from this picture, it can be associated or attached with a significance. That's what we mean by associated, attached with a significance to whatever other sensation or impression is received from that experience. So this is all of this encoded information is then treated with the same emotional significance and association, and this happens below the domain of analytical thought. And this is about as close to this thing that some call the subconscious that we are probably describing with our systemology. Because we've found that particular dichotomy, that old school dichotomy, actually doesn't work out very well. So we've changed that up a bit. And in NexGen Systemology, we actually acknowledge that there's a combination of all this information, all the forms, the literal content of an imprint, and that this constitutes below the surface memory. And so I would strongly suggest, at this juncture, studying related materials from the grade 3 volumes, particularly Tablets of Destiny, if you want a good introduction on the specifics regarding imprints. So I'm not trying to lose the newcomers here, but the purpose for introducing some of the more advanced systemology concepts for closing out our Power of Zoo lecture series, I mean, it's important. Imprinting, and this is important information, it's pretty fundamental to our systemology. I mean, imprinting and emotional encoding, these take place, well, they may take place or be re-stimulated into activity at any time. Particularly if an individual is going to experience a significant reduction of actualized awareness. You'll notice when people are being affected by, we talk about, halting before processing, finding out if the person's hungry, aggravated, lethargic, thirsty. Any reduction biochemically in actualized awareness leaves a person more susceptible. And the quality of fragmentation, it's actually even encouraged and reinforced chemically as a byproduct of many agents found in common everyday modern living. And this is no small matter concerning the state of the human condition. It's certainly no small matter when a seeker has determined to take the route of defragmentation. So, again, I'm not here to try and impose a certain moral ethic upon you as far as what to eat, how to live, but yeah, cosmic law exists, and it's unrelentless in its own reactive forces, and there's a way to do this, and there's a way to keep doing what people have been doing. And that's all fine and good too, but I can guarantee you, if what you've been doing is working out so well for you, you probably wouldn't be here, and you wouldn't be listening to this. You obviously know that there's something more. So it should be understood that this true and faithful Zoo knowledge, I'll call it, it supersedes any moral imperative that can be attached to what we're calling like the right way of life. This is, for religio spiritual purposes or dogma. I mean, this supersedes and is beyond all of that. It's not our present purpose here. Our present purpose here lies strictly in what has been just found effectively workable in actual practice. It shouldn't really be a real surprise that so many main tenets of our philosophy should concur with some or another older, formerly known spiritual paradigm. I mean, this should only be viewed as a reflection of the unifying truth. This is that we're recognizing about existence. It's kind of easy to spot once it's recognized. But just because we've come into some kind of synchronicity with something you might be familiar with in the past, anyone who's worked through our grade 3 material can assure you this is nothing like the way you've seen the arcane mysteries relayed in the past. This is completely new. And you'll find traces of this truth in ancient wisdom teachings, but it's pretty much been established by my own circles, the people that have been involved for over the past decade, just in the development of this, that the exact communication of these former messages do not seem to have been as widely heard throughout the world. and certainly not to the same extent as intended by their originators. Or when they were heard, it seemed as if the words were completely heard incorrectly. Now, this is not my opinion. The basic state of the world right now is my only basis for this judgment, and no other specific demographic or cultural bias is intended. Now, whether or not the full nature of the human condition is already understood by whatever unseen hand directs these systems governing human civilization, it's irrelevant. It should be clearly stated here that the direction we've been guided toward and the destination that humanity is headed on Earth is precisely nowhere, or else nowhere that will sustain the prime directive of our existence, which, if you know our terminology, you know the prime directive is simply to exist. And if you're familiar at all with the moral ethics that are relayed in Mardukite Zuism as a religious or spiritual practice, you would know that the only dogmatic form we have regarding sin is to the extent of the spheres of influence that exists throughout all of existence, that which the interconnected systems are related to between self and our habitation, the groups and societies we form, all of humanity, all of life on Earth, all life in the solar system, the cosmos, out into spiritual existence. So, the actions of a few individuals, and then of course the masses, which are not rising up to stop them in any way, is committing sins literally against some of the highest echelons, the highest directives, prime directives of existence for this planet. And, it's pretty important for life to play out on this planet. I don't know too many people yet that are in a position to consciously up and out into another form of existence. And by that I don't mean just straight death. So, till such a time that you have self-actualized the Alpha Spirit to a point that you may choose to direct yourself to one or another physical alternate form at will, even a form that's not necessarily restricted to this planet, but until this time, there is certainly every reason, even ethics aside, to preserve the necessary conditions of physical life on Earth. And that is with the utmost respect to the planet as a living, organic system and the host of other life forms that it supports. Now, the irresponsible enforcement of false power is what has led the human condition towards conditions where it must make a very firm decision right now to evolve or die. A true spiritual evolution of the human condition is exactly what is charted on the pathway to self-honesty. And the materials that we've developed for grade 3, including Tablets of Destiny and Crystal Clear, these provide a solid map that will extend the certainty and reach of the human condition far and beyond the state it has succumbed to. We also now have the much anticipated companion, the Truth Seeker's Adventure Journal, finally available for those who have been working through the self-processing provided in the core textbooks. And this actually is a tremendous advantage and is actually allowing people to achieve greater results in their processing. We've been hoping to also develop some other pilot books for this as well. And now, you should understand these grade 3 materials are not the end-all of everything we hope to aspire to. even within our still developing angle of approach. But grade 3, of which the Power of Zoo lecture series is a part of, introducing you to, is still literally milestones ahead of what has naturally taken place in the present human society happening around us today. And by this I mean both the Western and the Eastern civilizations. Because as far as I can see in the East, they have lost their way as well at this juncture, and have basically turned their backs on their own spiritual heritage as well. The Orient, that once prided itself in spiritual perfection eons ago, they have detoured far, far from the glory of the red dragon and have pretty much stabbed it through its heart. The entire planet Earth requires a healing and a rehabilitation of spiritual ability, each and every living organism. It's all interconnected. And it starts with the individual cell. And that's how we work in systemology. You have an individual cell, the individual being, because we know what its potential can be. This is where we start, by strengthening actualized awareness and personal certainty of the individual. So I've been asked this question at this juncture. Cannot actually be absolutely certain where the energy comprising imprints and other personal fragmentation is actually stored on a physiological level. Alright, that much I might as well just come clean with, because too many people put forth a lot of theories about this. Now, since the emergence of the strong New Thought movement in the early 20th century America, there's just been too many ideas and not enough solid research, physical experimentation, at least not enough to be brought to light at this juncture, at least from our offices. But a lot of people have talked about the cellular level, and DNA or genetics. It may very well be that information is mainly stored at a more etheric level of existence, and that this reel of film that's attached to our identity is like all that we're even taking with us from this lifetime. And maybe we actually take too much with us from this lifetime and previous ones. And maybe that's actually what we're here to figure out, because all manner of fragmentation that still remains to be processed out is the greatest weights and the strongest images and the biggest burdens to bear, even in between lifetimes. So that's probably the direction to go. And you'll find more details about that as we press on with the systemology work, because that's what you're going to find in those textbooks. There are some subjects that lead directly into higher level systemological pursuits, but for our present purposes, let me just relay an idea that emotional encoding is interconnected to the biochemical organism and its living systems in this lifetime. And even the genetic memory it stores from previous generations of cellular communication at a biological level. And by that I mean very specifically the genetic vehicle, because that's primarily chemical in nature. And of course, in later degrees, we begin to differentiate identities. We begin to differentiate the identity between the memory that we carry with us as a spiritual identity and what we've inherited from the cellular and genetic level by just adopting any kind of affinity to operate these bodies. But we'll get to that again. I mean, we're trying to keep things light for this conference. So when we discuss, kind of like in the previous lectures, like relationship to food, the water, the air that's being processed by any living organism, really, we're referring to the chemical qualities of existence in the physical universe, the substances, the nutrients, the means by which various chemicals are processed by organs composed of other chemicals. It's all chemicals. There's a certain chemical equilibrium, and this is kind of sought by the living organic systems in order to maintain their optimum efficient operations. And yeah, we've discussed previously, I forget which lecture now, but about living organisms as a open system, and with a constant reception and expulsion of chemicals. So this is like an ongoing, continuous, systematic process. And of course, it has its own level of prime directive, to maintain its own existence. See, there's an ongoing relationship between the genetic vehicle following its own coding for an existence and the direction and determination of that, and also the direction and determination of the governing alpha spirit, which is independently seeking its own optimum means of infinite survival. That's why I say there's two factors at play there. At least two. So there's a few aspects, hindrances to upholding a prime directive on any level. So again, the prime directive is just to exist. Now, from whatever viewpoint that is, that would be the prime directive of that viewpoint. Whether it's a genetic vehicle or an alpha spirit, any living organism, even a system is designed to exist. It doesn't have to be organic in the sense that people are used to the term. It's also, when we treat systems as being organic, what we call them is we call them dynamic. Dynamic systems are the equivalency of organic biochemical life forms. It's biochemical life forms are dynamic systems. Dynamic systems are not exclusively biochemical life forms. But anyways, so hindrances to the prime directive. One, obviously, is negligence. Just not treating it. Another would be incidental injury. Stuff happens, right? So, and then of course there's the physical entropy that seeks to essentially enforce cosmic law of material deterioration, because it's seeking its own optimum conditions, which at the physical universe, you understand, in our literature, we represent it with the circle or the zero with the horizontal line through it. It's looking for a stasis point back towards infinite zero, or absolute zero, basically a point of total fragmentation. You put the systems into order, you build up the wall, you put together a car or a house, and the defining quality of physical time is then defined by the deterioration of those forms, of those systems, as entropy. That's your time. Anyone that says time is an illusion obviously isn't looking around. This time's happening all around. It's called deterioration. It's called entropy. Flows. The reason we have frequency. This is all judged by time. Time is not limited to a giant rock spinning around a fiery globe. The time is the deterioration of optimum conditions as measured visibly through space. You watch something move through space, it's going to deteriorate. It's going to have a, you know, in what is it, in chemistry they call it half-lives. You know, doesn't mean it's going to disintegrate necessarily into absolute zero, because, you know, you have it, and you have it, and you have it, and you get down to these little minuscule points. It's always working in that direction. So that's what we represent as the epitome of the physical universe, in an opposition to another type of infinity, which would be the infinity of nothingness. And that's another thing that we treat again at further on in grade 3. So there's common ways in which individuals go out of this world, and very few individuals actually ascend. Okay, that's kind of something that they sell you on, but that's not the case. The condition of ascension is not guaranteed by a body death. I mean, okay, sure, yeah, after this incarnation, you'll most certainly leave behind physical restrictions of your associative identity with this most recently governed body. That much is true. But there is no guarantee you're automatically going to access high levels of clear self-actualization simply by dying. That is not how it works. That's not how it works at all. So that's something that we work towards very specifically in our work. The preliminary spiritual experiments for systemology that we've been doing are currently being conducted. These already demonstrate most apparently that imprinting, the imprints, the most solidified types of personal fragmentation, are actually more permanent than we originally suspected, even carrying over from one experience of a lifetime to the next and continuing to affect the capability, or the capacity for the ability. That's how we're defining capability now in systemology. The capacity for the ability to direct total self-determined awareness. Now, if the highest ideals of ascension were an automatic guarantee, if this was actually the case, there'd be no systematic or functional purpose behind repeated lifetimes spent toward achieving this same result. Since we can also ascertain that this same lofty goal is applied to an individual's spiritual great work in every single physical incarnation, to the extent that they're even aware of it, there'd be no reason to be doing this over and over. Obviously, we're in some kind of trapping here. And we cannot even be certain, without a doubt, that the entire experience of the human condition is not, in itself, an incredibly powerful electronic imprint that has been implanted and enforced on the alpha spirit for the experience of beta reality. Okay, so true, many of these additional philosophic matters, they're really taken up at higher grades of knowledge and work, because they do not, see, they don't in any way, and I bring them up, and I bring you up to these points now. We've talked a lot about the physical stuff in the last few lectures, and now I bring you up to this. Now we're going to pull back, and there's a reason for that, because, see, this is to show you where we're going with systemology, but it does not in any way, for those of you just coming into this, studying this, starting out, getting the preliminaries, getting your footing, see, this doesn't change the more immediate tasks at hand that are necessary for seekers to get this sure footing and start unfolding this personal journey on the pathway to self-honesty. That sure footing is taken up in these more physical rudiments that we've explained over the past 9 lectures. It's quite simply, it's in the greatest interest of the individual, the seeker, and of benefit to, like, all those they interact with as, you know, their reality experience in the physical universe, to attain and maintain the highest ideal state for the human condition possible during this lifetime. It's no exaggeration that the course taken, the fate of the entire successive evolution of the human condition, may very well rely on what you're doing right here, right now, what you're able to manifest for the future. And Systemology provides you with the effective power of 10 million butterfly sneezes. There are very few things that can hinder the incredible power and potentials waiting to unfold for a seeker. But fragmentation is certainly one of them. And too often it goes unchecked while sights are set on some higher plane. The natural biochemical organic processes of the genetic vehicle, which it maintains its optimum function and health, coinciding with the clearest circulation of zoo energy, it can just as easily be upset by many different sources of personal turbulence, most of which are just simply taken for granted by individuals. They've become too accustomed to the modern way of things, and they don't raise them to a scrutiny. There's many substances that can affect the processing and chemical equilibrium of the genetic vehicle that are just inherent in the basic modern way of life. The chemicals, the natural and synthetic, the drugs, again, natural or synthetic, dietary supplements, foods, the additives, the preservatives. We have toxic hazards, pesticides in the foods, industrial chemicals, solvents, and waste products. Radiation, the atomic radiation, electromagnetic, even emotional radiation. Just about every other application of external and mechanical technologies, from automobiles to X-rays to atomic fission and nuclear bombs. There are literally no shortages of avenues leading toward or directly reinforcing one type or another of personal fragmentation, and yet until only relatively recently in human history, there have been only shortages and surefire ways to properly manage and alter this convoluted universe composed of agreements so arcane and archaic that we can hardly even trace their origins. We simply adopt them and enforce our children to also agree. Now, obviously, many aspects of modern living are taken for granted. Once postulated and set in motion by someone in the long-distance past, they're just left to run, and they're fed continuously, they keep running, and simply to maintain the place of holding up some delicate house of cards that represents this whole governing system of the human condition. And any aspect of modern living that is contributory to fragmentation, including chemical fragmentation, and meaning that it affects self-determined physio-biochemical functions of the genetic vehicle, you're going to have to take these into account. I mean, as a seeker charts the course of their personal journey towards self-honesty, any source of fragmentation must be taken into account. It's the same basic pathway for all of us. But each individual is going to find their own unique facets of poorly associated knowledge that they're going to have to work out or process out, as we say it, during this lifetime if they want to make their ascent. This defragmentation is the necessary condition of the ascent. Poorly associated information, leads to setting up automated reactive responses to the physical universe, and this happens in the absence of true knowledge. The systematic reduction and elimination of this erroneous encoding, that's what defines defragmentation, and it's the way out from trappings and limitations, and which we've all at one time or another agreed to. And with each of these agreements, agreed to a reduced condition of personal self-determination. The repair of self-determinism is quite possibly, it's it's the most important thing you could be doing. And it is actually possible with the proper processing and rehabilitation of the control of self as alpha spirit. But a seeker should be very certain that they're not working against themselves, that the true efforts toward achieving these goals, continuing behavioral tendencies or contact with counterproductive counter efforts that may hinder or even render useless and know the potential gains and wins of our various methods that we prescribe through our textbooks. Now, when you line up all of the truly effective spirito-mystical metaphysical procedures that appear throughout the last 6,000 years of recorded history, let me tell you, there are not very many effective and workable methods of note. And each one carries and shares actually a particular commonality of their practices, regimens or what have you, and it actually, I can tell you, it can be reduced to the most one single fundamental concept, and that's called purification. And regardless of which spiritual source, from your past you might turn to for inspiration, or if you want to develop with us, the modern NexGen Systemology paradigm, we were confronted by one version or another of self-purification rites and formulas. These demonstrations are as commonly shared across the boards as the theme of initiation, which is defined at the very end of the crystal clear textbook. But the mystic rites and the esoteric rules of purification, these actually precede steps of initiation. An initiate has to always present themselves for initiation ceremonies only after a period dedicated to personal purification. Of course, in NexGen Systemology, we treat the subject of these aspects without necessarily participating or conjuring up one or another brand of traditional esoterica, such as you might find explored more thoroughly within its own playing field, what we treat as grade 1. Previously, I provide that type of information like the Sorcerer's Handbook, Druid's Handbook, Vampire's Handbook, Elvenomicon, and so forth. By comparison, though, the work of grade 3, it in no way contradicts these former paradigms, but we are in Mardukite and NexGen Systemology treating a unification of any such former understandings at a higher order of reasoning, and with an appropriate semantic paradigm that's not restricted to any one or another of those former paradigms. So our goal, my goal, in the development of systemology was and is the highest echelon of understanding possible outside of any one or another of these paradigms. And should any of this somehow validate something else directly that may be now recognized from some other paradigm from back down the timeline, well, that's great. But understand this is not in any way my direct intention regarding this, validating any of these things. Whether using some version of obscure medieval sorcery out of an old archaic dusty grimoire, perhaps like attending to contact yourself in some roundabout convoluted way as described by wizards like Abramelin, after 6 months of pious living and purification treatments, would then make contact with self as some external identity. It's commonly referred to as the holy guardian angel in some ceremonial magic traditions, or the higher genius, and so forth. You got a lot of names for this thing called self, apparently, but perhaps this premise is even set forth with an ancient foreknowledge that there are multiple entities interacting or influencing what is experienced as the identity as in for by self. So the point to keep in mind here, even this arcane experimental sorcerer type still carefully observe purification periods before even bothering to apply ritualized efforts to explore new vistas or open up gateways of understanding. So there's checks and balances at work in the universe. The more clearly observant and aware the seeker is about these basic laws governing the cosmos, cosmic law. It's referred to on the arcane tablets as cosmic ordering. As the awareness of self observes the moves and turns taking place in this realization of the physical universe, the more amazing and magical the individual appears to be. For those that have not yet to attain the same level of actualized awareness, that's why these people, you look up and they seem like wizards, right? They seem amazingly high above the standards everyone else is, the standard issue programming, the one foot in front of the other robotic method that most people have simply become accustomed to, getting through their daily existence with, so forth. If you look back, one examines the regimens of monks and shamans, we find, equal significance given to the health and strength of the physical body, our genetic vehicle, its purification, as we find given to the treatment of the spiritual and the astral levels of existence. And, and those are the ones that compose the more colorful, esoteric, and mystical lore that survives in the New Age today. That's the stuff people are after, not completely leaving out the rudiments and wondering why they never get past grade 1. So, just in a nutshell, for detoxifying, physically, we could suggest simply a regimen of light exercise, walking or jogging, to increase your circulatory flow, and you can follow that up with what they used to use, in different practices as a sweat lodge, or in the Finnish wizards as the sauna, to literally purge the body of its chemical fragmentation, and then make sure fluids, minerals, vitamin nutrients all have to be supplemented, and regulate, stabilize personal chemistry during the process. I'm not going to create an entire regimen for this. These are the type of practices that you can look into. It's just the thing is that many individuals, when left unaided, they don't change their ways because of the sensation of withdrawal that often occurs, even if they know better. And many modern practitioners and spiritualists and New Agers of every flavor, they've too often overlooked the benefits gained from pious lifestyles maintained by those. They admire them in the people of the past that have tread this pathway before, and then they just go about things in another way. So you see a lot of this in some of the humdrum methods of people talking about positive thinking, creative visualization, taking a few minutes in front of the mirror and chanting axioms and affirmations. None of it's long enough to override lifetimes of bombardment or even the interference prevalent in one single lifetime in the modern world. The human condition requires just a little bit more assistance now to grant the certainty necessary to rise up and confront the sources of turbulence, and therefore preventing further additional forms of fragmentation. This is completed in another